Today's daf we're going to be learning a Shevuot daf Kaf. Today's daf is sponsored by Helen Danzig in memory of her beloved mother on her 20th yahrzeit. Her love of family is a guiding force for me. Today's daf is sponsored by Debbie and Yossi Gvir on the birth of two new grandchildren. With joy and gratitude to Hashem, Mazal Tov to our beloved children Elazar and Sarah on the birth 2 months ago of their daughter Shaked Tova, and to our beloved children Eliyav and Noya on the birth of their son Ofek Shalom, whose brit was yesterday. Shiur Smachot B'Yisrael. Okay, we're going to get started now with our daf. I want to go back to the very top of yesterday's daf. We mentioned something that I couldn't remember exactly what Rebbe had said. So Rabbi Akiva we were asking a question according to Rabbi Akiva's approach. If you remember, Rabbi Akiva's of the approach that Chuma Mikdash, the forgetting about the Mikdash, forgetting about the Kodashim does not obligate you in a korban. And then we had to explain what he needed since he didn't accept this drasha of Rabbi Eliezer about the sheretz v'ne'elam. What was the purpose of sheretz? And the Amos said sheretz was there just because we needed behema and chaya. Why do we need behema and chaya? That was for the drasha of Rebbe, and that's where I got confused. I couldn't remember the drasha, what the purpose of Rebbe was. The Rebbe's drasha, I look back then and I remember then, Rebbe's drasha is that, if you remember, that pasuk is missing the subject, or it's missing not the subject, but it's missing what you do when you're tamei, right? It's missing the main point. It says a person who's tamei and forgets gets punished, but for what's the action? That's what it's really missing, the action that they did. What's the action that they did? That was learned from Xer Shava, from a different pasuk, which talks about Be'emat Me'an. It talks about eating sacrificial meat. And because of that, they're saying, it must be the person was tamei and then ate the sacrificial meat. And that's the subject of that pasuk. And it comes to, and then we had Mina Mikdash Lo Yavo, right? And you can't eat the meat and you can't go to the temple. From there, they learn from the other pasuk that it also means you were tamei and went into the temple. But it doesn't teach you anything about Helen, Mikdash, and Kodesh Shabbat, Dafka not. So you Helen Tuma and then went into the Mikdash or ate the meat. Okay, now we're going back to our topic. So now we're finished with all of that. We started our new chapter about the Shevuot Shayin Chain Arba. We discussed yesterday the issue of Rabbi Akiva versus the rabbis. Rabbi Akiva saying there's no requisite amount that you need to eat. Any kind of eating is going against your oath, breaking your oath. We have Rashi and Tosfot, and look at exactly why. Now we're going to go into one of the words in the Mishna. The Mishna had said, if you say Shevuot She'ochal or Shelo Ochal, right? One of the options is, I take an oath that I will eat or that I won't eat. When do you break the oath of I will eat if you don't eat, right? So now the Gemara says, L'meimra de she'ochal. If I say Shevuot she'ochal, a Shevuot that I will eat, it means that I will eat. I'm taking this oath that I will eat. Okay, that's pretty obvious. But it's not so obvious because of Ramini. This contradicts the following source. And by the way, at the bottom of your Tanam Bet. Shvuah lo'ochalach, if I say, I take an oath, I will not eat from you. Okay, there's one extra word here, which is lach or lecha. I will not eat from you. Or shvuah she'ochal lecha, or I swear that I will eat from you. Or lo shvuah lo shelo ochalach, it's very weird language, not a shvuah that I won't eat from you. Asur. All three of those languages mean I'm basically taking an oath I'm not going to eat any food of yours. Now, this is very strange because why shvuah she'ochalach, that I will eat, means that I won't eat. It means the opposite. And it means the opposite of what we said in the Mishnah. So, Amar Abaye, we're going to have two answers to this question. Abaye's answer is going to be, it all depends on the context. So, La'olam da'achil namashma. Really, if I take an oath, I'm going to eat, it means I'm going to eat, literally. But lo kashya, don't worry about this braita that we saw because kam b'misarvim bolechol, kam b'she'en misarvim bolechol. It all depends on the context. If someone is saying, you need to come eat in my house, you need to come eat in my house, and they're really bothering you about it, and you don't want to, you finally say to get them off your back, I'm taking an oath that I'm not going to eat in your house, and you say it in the language of, I'm taking an oath that I'm eating with you, okay? What you really mean is, I'm not going to eat there. And you can explain it as Shevuah she'ochalach. I'm taking an oath that she'ochalach, whatever you have to feed me kind of thing, whatever there is to eat of yours, I will not eat. That's basically what it's saying. It's saying, I'm taking an oath against what I might eat by you. Okay? And because of the context of you keep bothering me to eat and eat and eat, I finally just respond that Shevuah she'ochalach. I obviously mean I'm not planning to eat in your house. So, right? Our Mishnah had no any situation that would lead us to think that it means anything other than the simple reading. But the braita, what you're basically saying is, no way am I eating by you. I'm not eating, I'm not eating. Okay? And the and when you took the oath, what you meant to say is, okay? That's what you're basically saying. Rav Ashi Abar, right? It's a bit of a strange interpretation because then you're really taking these words mean really something opposite. So Rav Ashi has a better, or I don't know, a different interpretation. Rav Ashi Amar Tini Shvuah she'i ochalach. He says you have to fix the wording. It's obviously not she'ochalach. She'ochalach really means I will eat. So it must be she'i ochalach. It adds a little bit of word in there, right? The e. E, like the word efshal, means it's not possible, right? E means not. So it must be she'i ochalach. So now they ask, okay, well, if it's so obvious, like the braita said, shvuah shelo ochalach, and then shvuah she'i ochalach, but i ochalach is the same as lo ochalach. So why do you need to bring that separately? Well, ma'u detema lishani de itkilale kamash malan. You might have thought it could be the person stuttered a little, right? She'ochal, and instead of saying she'ochal, they said she'i ochal, right? She'i ochal. Okay, it came out of your mouth the wrong way, and then you fixed it. Maybe you would say it's that. Kamash malan, no. If you say the word she'i ochalach, we assume you really meant it, and we go by that. This, by the way, raises the question, why don't we just ask you what you meant, right? Ask you, did you stutter, did you not? So often in these cases, we can explain it that we're talking about a situation where somebody said something, and then they later don't really remember what they said or what they meant by what they said. And therefore, we're trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we interpret it then? But if the person really said, that's really what I meant, then probably we can go by that. But it's a bit of a murky area, that whole question. You might remember we talked about this by Nidarim a lot. But, this is what the person means by these words, right? These words mean this, that words mean that. But, why don't we just find out what they really meant? Okay, Tanu Rabbanit. Now we're going to get to the complicated part of today's daf, which is a very unclear braita. And we're going to have one interpretation of Abaye and one interpretation of Rava about how to read this braita. Now, before we start, let's just go through the difference between a Shevuot and a neder. A Shevuot is basically, first of all, practically speaking, you're only liable a korban olav yoreh, which is our main topic, for an oath, not, right, that's a Shevuot, not for a vow. Right, if you express in words an oath to do something good or bad, meaning to either say, I will eat something or I won't eat something, and then you go against that vow, that's the shtaim. If you remember, the arba is also passed, that I ate, that I didn't eat. Those are another two. And we're going to say you're also chayav a korban olav yoreh in those cases, but not if you take a vow and don't keep your vow. You don't keep your vow, it's a different lo taseh. It's lo yachel devaro. You cannot go against your word. Okay, the psukim for the false oath is also, in other words, you have to bring a korban olav yoreh. That's from the psukim in Vayikra that I just quoted. And there's lo taseh, either shvuat sheker or shvuat shav. Later in the daf, we're going to get to that. What's considered, which are in the category of sheker, which are in the category of shav. Both of those have lo taseh in the Torah. So if you do them intentionally, you'll get lashes. Also, if you go against your vow intentionally, you'll get lashes. The difference is only if you do it b'shkaga, right? You're going to get punished with a korban olav yoreh in a shvuah. You're not going to in a neder. So that's one difference. A neder is lo yachel dvaho. If you say you're going to do something, you can't not do what you said you're going to do. But the other difference is how they're worded. A neder, and really what they are going on. A shevuah is about yourself. I will not do something. A neder could also be about yourself, but the focus is not yourself. The focus is the forbidden item. This food will be forbidden to me. Okay, ki karzo alai. That's the language of a neder usually. This loaf will be forbidden to me. Now, it's forbidden to me, but it's the loaf that has the isar in it. In the words of the Gemara, we call this, or Aramaic, cheftza and gavra. Okay, the shvuah is on the gavra, it's on the person. Okay? I take an oath, I will not do something. And the vow is on the object. The object has the isur upon it. So now we have this braita. And now we talk about other languages. You could say, I take an oath. You could say, I take a vow, a shvuah, a neder, ani nishba, right? I take a neder, a vow. By the way, Daf Mishalahen, I noticed yesterday, not everybody knows Daf Mishalahen is now in English. So Daf Mishalahen is in English, and this week they talk about differences between different types of vows, and they give a very good intro to the whole topic. So recommended you listen. The braita basically wants to talk about other languages that are mentioned in the Torah in the context of the psukim about vows and oaths, and want to define what they are. So if you use this language and you say mivta, or you say isar, what did you mean? Okay, and here it could be you're going to say, right, isar, Rashi uses this language, mivta kikar zo alai. Even if you said mivta kikar zo alai, and it sounds like the language of a vow, which is, right, mivta means to express in words. So mivta kikar zo alai, even though it sounds like a vow, it's really a Shevuot, because mivta is Shevuot. We're going to prove it later from the psukim where we get that. But mivta sfatayim is a Shevuot. And isar is also a Shevuot. Now here Rashi chooses the example of isar alai kikar zeh. Okay, isar, like from the language of Asur. By the way, we know this from Kol Nidre. Kol Nidre v'yasarei, that's isar. So isar is a Shevuot. Okay, so far this sounds pretty simple. I don't know what's complicated. Isar is a Shevuot, mivta is a Shevuot. You use those languages, you mean oath. Isar, isur, isur, isar. Okay, the isur of an isar. It's a little bit tricky, confusing. Im ata omer isar shvuah chayav, v'im lav patur. This is the confusing line. If you want to know about an isar, whether it's asur, like when it's going to be forbidden, well, if you say isar is shvuah, then you're liable, meaning to bring the korban because it's a shvuah. V'im lav patur, and if not, you're going to be exempt from the korban. Okay, ima taomer. Now the Gemara starts off with their big question. Ima taomer isar shvuah. If you say isar is a shvuah, v'ha'amarta, you just said isar shvuahu. In the first sentence, you said isar is a shvuah. The next sentence, you said if it's a shvuah, then you'll be chayav a korban. If it's not a shvuah, you won't be chayav a korban. So obviously, those two sentences contradict each other, and that's our big question. That's going to lead to Abaye's answer and Rava's answer. What we're going to learn soon is that Abaye and Rava's answer is based on some machloket they have in another context and its application here. Amar Abaye, hachi kama, mivta shvuah. Okay, that we're keeping the same. Mivta, you use that language, it's a shvuah no matter what. Isal is matpis b'shvuah. Now we open a whole new thing. What is matpis b'shvuah? So matpis is either you can be matpis on shvuah or on a neder. It's when you say this is like this, and you had some other item before that was forbidden. So a matpis b'shvuah would be, I say I'm forbidding I take an oath not to eat this loaf of bread, and then I say to be matpis on the shvuah, I say, and this is like that, meaning, and I take an oath not to eat this loaf either. Okay, that's matpis. And you could do it with a neder also. You say kikar zeh alai, and then you say, and this too. Okay, we've seen this with Nazir also. Someone's passing by, right? He's a Nazir, and then you say, aha, right? I'll be a Nazir like that person. So that's called hatpasa. Okay, we learned all about this in Masechet Nedarim and in Masechet Nazir. It's called hatpasa. Now, hatpasa works by neder, it works by Nazir. The question is, does it work by shvuah? Okay, there's a good footnote in the Koran that I actually read very quickly just before class. The question is, what's harder to understand about the stuff are the concepts, really. And there's a lot of footnotes there, so if you have a Koran, it might be recommended to look through them. Also, the Shansin has a lot of good footnotes here. There's a lot of different opinions about all this. One of the explanations I quickly glanced at was that there's a difference between, because a shvuah and a neder, one is, right, the shvuah is on the person. So hatpasa might not necessarily work, because we're going to have this whole machloket. Does hatpasa work in a shvuah or not? Before I really get to explaining what is inside the Gemara, I want to just explain it outside. That if I do hatpasa on an object, I can do that, object to object. But person to object might not necessarily work, right? To do a hatpasa on a shvuah, or I would say like this, if the first shvuah is I can't do something, right? That hatpasa works to an object, and that's not an object. Now, I did say it, right? I swore that I wouldn't eat this loaf. So it does apply to the loaf, but it really applies to me and the loaf, not the loaf itself. The problems with me, not the loaf. So I can't necessarily be matpis something onto that. Okay, that's possibly one way of looking at it. So now comes Abaye and says, you can be matpis b'shvuah. He thinks there's no problem. And he said, what is an isar? An isar works. It's not an oath, not the simple reading of the braita. Isar is not an oath. If I use the language of isar, it's, and this is Rashi says this, it's like someone who did hadpasat. It's not actually doing hadpasat. You don't necessarily need to have some other forbidden object. But if I say, okay, isar alai kikar zo, okay, it's forbidden upon me this loaf, even if I'm not saying it's like another loaf, but what we're basically saying is this loaf is forbidden to me because it's like something else that someone took an oath about. In other words, I'm missing the language of I'm taking an oath. So there has to, right? So we're basically saying it works because it's like I'm being matpis on some other oath, like someone else who took an oath. That's how it's working. Right? That's what Rashi says. It's like the person is saying, this is forbidden to me like some other loaf I already forbade to myself. It doesn't mean you have to have done it on a first loaf and then a second one. But that's how it works. That's what isar means. Isar equals hadpasat shvuah. Okay? It's like I did a hadpasat. So this is all trying to understand what is the isar language in the Torah. So according to the simple reading of the Mishna and the way we're going to read, the braita, and the way we're going to see Rava is that isar is actually the language of an oath. Okay, you say isar, it's an oath, although Rava is going to say it kind of depends on something. But we'll get to Rava soon. But Abaye says, no, an isar is not actually an oath. It's hadpasa in an oath. Now, why does it matter? Now comes the second line. So the first line, according to Abaye, doesn't say we thought mivta shvuah and isar is shvuah. No, mivta shvuah and isar is hadpasat shvuah, which means, well, isar, when is the isar going to be forbidden and you're going to be chayav a korban? Well, it depends what your opinion is about hadpasa b'shvuah. If you hold that someone who says this loaf is forbidden, right? Shvuah alai, right? I'm forbidding to myself this kikar, and then I say, and this like that. If this like that works to say that's like an oath, then also on isar you're going to be chayav a shvuah. That's going to be counted like an oath because if hadpasat oath works, then isar, which is like a hadpasat of an oath, is going to work. Vim lav, patur. But if you don't hold that way, then you're going to be exempt. So that's how he understands the second line. The second line is ima talmer, right? The way it really sounds. If you hold like this, then you'll be obligated korban. If you don't think hadpasat shvuah works like an oath, then you won't be chayav a korban. It's actually a big question. It's very interesting, machloket. If it doesn't work, does it mean it doesn't work completely? Like the Rambam thinks it doesn't work completely. It means you just said nothing. Most of the other commentaries, though, say, no, it works. It's just not called an oath, which means you don't bring the korban. Because remember, it's more maybe like a vow, or you still express something that you shouldn't do, and you have to keep your word. But you're just not liable like an oath. It's just not called an oath. Okay. But for sure, you shouldn't not keep your word. Okay, whereas the Rambam seems to say it is nothing, doesn't count at all. That's an interesting side debate. Now, it's not so side because it really helps us understand what this is. Is this something? Is it nothing? Or is it right? Is it something, just not a shvuah, or is it nothing at all? So now we say, again, if we were doing an Elon Shiur, we get much more into that. So now that's Abaye's reading. Again, mivta is an oath. Isar is a hadpasat oath. And then it really depends. Do you think hadpasat of an oath is an oath or do you not? And that will affect whether you bring a korban or not for the language of isar kikar za'alai. Umimai de mivta or vitzala or isar alai kikar zo, either which way. Doesn't matter whether it's language of a shvuah, language of a neder, either which way, it's a hadpasat shvuah. Now they say, umimai de mivta shvuah. So now we want to understand why Abaye says mivta is a shvuah and isar is a hadpasa. Because really, the language of the Torah seems equal for both. Umimai de mivta shvuah. Well, why do you think mivta is a shvuah, Abaye? Dichtiv, I assume it's because it says, o nefesh ki tishavala batebes fatayim. Okay, here you have a person who takes an oath to express with their lips. Okay, that's basically express. Mivta goes right next to shvuah. Isar nami, but Isar also says that. Dichtiv, kol neder b'chol shvuat isal. says a neder, or a shvuah ben isar. That sounds like isar's a shvuah. And elamimai isar matpis b'shvuah. If you want to, so basically, if you want to say mivta is a shvuah because of the way it appears in the pasuk, also isar has that same language. And if you want to say isar is matpis b'shvuah because of its language, also by mivta it has that same language. And then we're going to be kind of say, how does this make any sense? So elamimai isar matpis b'shvuah. How do you know the isar is matpis b'shvuah? Dichtiv. Oh, asra isar nafsha b'shvuah. This is the context of a woman who takes an oath or a vow, and then her husband cancels it, right? It's really hafarat nedarim, but also it's mentioned there, shvuah. Listen to the wording. Asra isar, she forbade an isar, al nafsha, on herself, b'shvuah, not a shvuah, but in a shvuah, meaning, it sounds like this is like that, right? She made it like a shvuah, meaning hadpasa on a shvuah. Well, mivtanami haktiv l'chol sheivate hadam bishvuah. That same bishvuah, though, appears also by mivta. So that doesn't work. Ella amar Abaye. So here Abaye explains at least how he gets the mivta bishvuah. He doesn't really explain how he gets the isar is matpis bishvuah. But mivta shvuah mehacha. The fact that mivta is an oath comes from here. If she gets married, unidareha aleha, and she has vows upon her, o mivtas bateha asher asra nafsha, or she has words she expressed that she forbade herself. Now, notice what things are in the pasuk. There's neder and there's mivtas bateha. Now, there's either neder usually or shvuah, or an oath. Ve'ilu shvuah lo ka'amar, right? It doesn't say the word shvuah, but it must be talking about an oath. And how did she forbid herself in an oath? With a mivta. So basically what they're saying is it should say shvuah there. It doesn't say shvuah, it says mivta spateh. From there we learn mivta is a shvuah. It's not the most convincing answer, but it is an answer. That's all Abaye. Now we're moving on to Rava. So first we dealt with explaining how Abaye read the Mishna, and then, how Abaye read the braita, that very unclear braita. And then we went to, well, what's the basis in the psukim for what he says, and we kind of at least found mivta shvuah. We didn't really find how we get the isar in the psukim is matpis b'shvuah. Or though I guess you could say the bishvuah and just by mivta, it's not, even though it says bid, because of the other pasuk. Theoretically, you could say that. Rava Amar. Now we're going to have Rava's reading of this braita. La'olam eimalecha. You could really say matpis b'shvuah. Everyone says basically, or I think that there is no such thing as matpis b'shvuah, kimotzi b'shvuah mipiv. And you have to say matpis b'shvuah lav kimotzi shvuah mipiv dami. And the truth is, that's really the root of the machloket. Rava doesn't think that if you're matpis b'shvuah, it works. So he obviously then doesn't think that isar is a matpis b'shvuah, because it wouldn't ever be a case where you'd be chayav, and the braita says you're chayav for isar. So he basically says that's not what we're talking about. Isar shvuah really means isar shvuah, not matpis b'shvuah. V'hachi kamar, and this is how to read the braita. Mivta shvuah, isar nami shvuah. Use the language of isar. That's actually a real oath. It's not matpis b'shvuah, because if it was, you'd never be obligated to korban. Esareha di isal. Now we're getting to the second line. The isurim of the isal. Well, hitilo katuv bein neder l'shvuah. He's just first giving some background. The pasuk stuck isar smack in the middle of a pasuk between the word neder and between the word shvuah. In a minute or two, we'll get to where. And therefore, I'll explain it like this. Hotzi o b'lashon neder, neder. B'lashon shvuah, shvuah. It all depends how you use the language isar in your isar that you took upon yourself. If you said isar kikar ze'alai and it was on the loaf of bread, then that's a neder. And then what will we say? You won't be chayav a korban if you go against it, because there's no korban for neder. If you expressed your isar in the language of an oath, isar alai kikar zeh, on yourself will be forbidden this loaf, then it's a shvuah, and then you'll be chayav. Okay, so basically, let's read again the braita. Let's go back to the beginning of the daf. Mivta shvuah and isar shvuah. Both mivta and isar are shvuot. And what we want to say now is isar can be a shvuah. It depends what language you use. Isar, isar. When do you have the chiyuv of a korban for an isar? Well, imata omer isar shvuah chayav. If you say the isar in the language of a shvuah, you'll be obligated the korban because it will be a shvuah. Bim lav, but if you didn't and you did it in the language of a vow, it'll be a vow and you won't be obligated the korban. That's basically the way to read it. Hechani tilo. So now we just want to understand where's the pasuk where it's smack in the middle. Ve'im beit is again with the woman and her husband nullifying her vows. Ve'im beit ishanidara, if she took the vow while she was in the house of her husband. Oh, asara isar. Okay, notice neder, then isar. Or she did an isar, al nafsha bishvuah. And then it says shvuah. So neder, isar, shvuah. There you see it's smack in the middle. That means the isar can go in both directions. Okay, now the Gemara tells us, as I told you before, Azdu the Tamayu, and they're consistent within their approaches because elsewhere it was said that they have this whole debate: does matpis b'shvua work like a shvua or not? So Deitmar, as it was said, matpis b'shvua. What if somebody does this hatpasat shvua and says this like that, and that would have been a vow, right? Abaye amar kemotzi shvua mipiv dami. Abaye says it's like you said an oath. And Rava Amar Lav Kimotzi Shvuah Mipiv. And Rava says it's not. And that is what caused each of them to read this in a different way. Rava couldn't possibly have read this sugya with the glasses of, Isar's matpis b'shvuah because he doesn't think that that would have been an oath. And again, the braita says you're chayav. Chayav is korban. So it would have to be that you view it as an oath. So that's why he couldn't explain the way he did. Now we're going to have a difficulty on Rava. Meitive. Ezu isar ha'amor b'Torah. Okay, here we get it. What is an isar forbidden by the Torah? Ha'omer harei alai shelo ochal basar v'shelo eshte yayin ki yom shemei po aviv, ki yom shemei po ploni, ki yom shenerag bo Gedalia ben Achikam, ki yom shera'a Yerushalayim b'churbanah, asur. If you say, I am forbidding upon myself that I won't eat meat or I won't drink wine on a day that on the day that my father was killed, died, or somebody died, and I took upon myself a vow on that day not to drink wine and not to eat meat, or kiyom shnerag bo Gedalia ben Achikam, and I took upon myself not to eat. Okay, now there it's a little trickier. We're gonna get back to this later, and no one can eat on that day anyway, right? We'll get back to that. And in fact, Daf Mishalahen is all about Gedalia. I'm sorry, flashback this week is all about Gedalia, Tzom Gedalia. And or like the day that Yerushalayim was destroyed, and I vowed not to eat on that day. So if on all of those days you took a vow, okay, and that's what Shmuel says now, but okay, it's going to be forbidden for you to eat meat or drink wine. The Amar Shmuel just said about that, you had to have already taken a vow on that day. If you didn't take a vow on that day and you just said, this is going to be forbidden to me like the day that my father died, and you hadn't taken a vow on the day your father died, then it's nothing. But basically, what do we call this? This is a good case of hatpasa, right? I basically said, this is going to be forbidden to me like it was on some other day. So now, why is this a difficulty to Rava? Well, bishlam ala Abaye. Matpis b'neder neder, matpis b'shvuah shvuah. Now, whether or not you can say this is a good question, but what they're saying is, if when you're matpis b'neder, we call this a neder, therefore, if you're matpis b'shvuah, we should call it a shvuah. Okay? That's what he says. Ela Rava, turning now to Amabed, kasha. But to Rava, he doesn't think there is matpis b'shvuah. And therefore, this shouldn't really work. So now, Amar lecha Rava can answer like this. Teretz ve'emahachi. You should read it like this. Ezehu isar neder ha'amor b'Torah. Ha'omer alai shelo chal basar v'shelo eshte yayin ki yom shemei po aviv ki yom shnerag bo ploni. Amar Shmuel v'hu shenador uba me'oto hayom. Rav is going to say, the way we read it is like this. What kind of isar neder would work b'hatpasa? Well, you have to do two things, really. Number one, you have to say what is forbidden, right? If I say this like this, that's not enough. What I have to say is look at the language in the braita. You have to express what it is that's going to be forbidden. I won't eat wine or drink, I won't eat meat or drink wine. And it has to be something that was forbidden by a vow. Okay, now, this means, by the way, two things forbidden by a vow. It means, number one, you had to have forbidden it by a vow. But number two, it can't be something that was forbidden to you not by a vow. That's the other chidush here. For example, if I say this is forbidden to me like pork, okay, since pork is forbidden already, right? It's not a davar in the door. It's not like I've taken a vow not to eat pork. It's something that's forbidden to me. So if it's something that's forbidden to me, by isur, not neder, it won't work. And that's the way Rava reads this braita. So again, you have to add, in order for it to work, this hatpasa, you would have to say the words, Hare alai shelo ochal basar v'shelo sheyan, what is forbidden. It's not enough just to say this is like that. But you have to say what are you forbidding? And you have to do it on something that was davar nador. My time, but where do you get this from, this davar nador? Well, Amakra ish ki yidor neder laHashem. And by the way, it's only in a neder, not in a shvuah. Ish ki yidor neder laHashem. Now, this pasuk could have been written in Hebrew as ish ki yidor laHashem. Yidor means take a neder. Okay, it's got both things in it. Take it, and what is it? A neder. It's got the verb and the noun. But why is it saying neder then? Ad shidor b'davar nadur. It's teaching you that you have to take a neder. If you're connecting it to something else, it has to be something that was taken already as a vow. Now, kiyom shemet bo aviv pshita. Okay, that's a pretty obvious case because it's a neder. On the day your father died, you must have taken a vow. But kiyom shnerag bo gedali ben achikam. So now they say, right, that's obvious. So what do they answer? Well, they brought that case just to also add this other case. Why is that a unique case? I said we get back to this because really that is a davar hatzur, right? It's already forbidden for you to eat. It's not because of a vow. So they say, Sal kadata chamina, kevan dechi lo nadar nami asul, ki nadar nami lo havi ale isul. If I hadn't taken a vow in Som Gedalia, I wouldn't have been able to eat wine, drink wine, or eat meat, right? So you might have thought when I take this neder and I say, right, I take a neder, I vow I won't drink wine or eat meat on Som Gedalia, lo havi ale isur. Maybe I won't be going against my vow because maybe it's not a real vow. Just like we say, ein shvuah halal shvuah, right? An oath doesn't, right? We learned mushba v'omei mehar Sinai, right? If I say, I swear I'm not going to eat pork, it's useless. Now, I can't eat pork anyway, but not because of the vow, because there is no vow on that. But on a neder, it's different because the vow is on myself, and I was already sworn at Har Sinai. With a neder, there's actually two different girsas in Rashi. Some people say it's because Rashi points out this other girsa that it's because it's Torah law versus rabbinic law. On rabbinic law, you could, and Som Gedalia is obviously not from the Torah. But it seems like the more accurate version, based on other sugyot, is that a neder could be chal on a neder. So if I do a neder not to eat on Som Gedalia or not to eat meat and drink wine, it actually it's chal, it works, okay? And therefore, you might have thought, that's why you needed this case of Som Gedalia. You might have thought the chilo nadar nami asur ki nadar nami lo havi ale isur, since if I hadn't vowed, it wouldn't be asur. Therefore, when I vowed, maybe it's not a neder at all. And therefore, if I said this day is like that, hilav matpis beneder, that would be matpis davar asur, not davar nadul. Kamash malan. It came to tell you no. It would apply. A neder on a neder works. Again, according to one version, that it's a neder on a neder works, and therefore I can be matpis beneder. Now we're finishing up this section. This was the hard section of today's daf. Rabbi Yochanan savar Rava. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan also said the same thing as Rava. He takes Rava's approach. The way in general we hold like Rava against Abaye. Makes sense. Dechiata Rava namar Rabbi Yochanan. I mean, again, Rabbi Yochanan's before Rava, but we're going to say he held by the same approach because when Ravin came and then he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, mivta lo ochalach, isar lo ochalach, shvuah. If you say mivta, I won't eat, or isar lo ochalach, that's a shvuah. Now, what would we say if he held like Abaye? He would say isar lo ochalach is matpis b'shvuah, not a shvuah actually, right? And it fits with Rava because it's isar lo ochalach, it's on you, and therefore it's a shvuah, it's an oath. Now we're going to get into the real question of what transgression did you transgress by doing this? So until now, we've been talking about Shevuot Bitoy, Lahaba, L'Sha'avar, right? Future, past. There's the Shtayim, Shem, Arba. We went through that before. And you're liable a korban. But what if, that's if you did it unwittingly. What if you did it intentionally and you got warned before? Do you know that if you do this, you'll get a punishment? You get lashes. Right, now, let's just go through the 4 cases and which ones you get lashes for. If you stand up right now and say, I swore I ate yesterday. So before somebody says, before you take this oath, just remember, if you ate yesterday, right, you're lying and you're going to be liable, right? So if you said, I swore I did eat or I didn't eat, and then basically they say, if you're lying about this, you'll get lashes, then you'll get lashes. Because right now we're going to learn that you get lashes on that kind of oath, even though it's a lav shem b'maaseh. But if you say, Shvuah she'ochal or shelo ochal, So let's go through the two. If I say that I won't eat and then I eat, I get lashes for that because then I ate, right? Somebody warns you, if you do this, and I'm about to eat, and they warn me right before I'm about to eat, if you eat, you're going to go against your oath and you're going to get lashes. I get lashes. But if I say Shevuot she'ochal and then I don't eat, we had two issues with it. Number one, it's a lav she'en bo ma'aseh. Generally, you don't get lashes for that. There are exceptions here. We'll talk about that. But generally, you don't get. And furthermore, it's according to a different opinion, it's hatra'at safek. When do you get warned? Because you have all day, let's say you say, I won't eat today. You have all day theoretically to be warned about it. So when they warn you right after you take the oath, since you don't immediately transgress at that next moment, that's called a hatra'at safek. It's not clear you're going to go against it or not. And therefore, you're not going to get lashes for it. Okay. So now, when Rav Dimi comes along, he says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, tomorrow we're going to see Rav in the name of Rabbi Yochanan say different things. Okay, but right now we're at Rav Dimi. Ochal velo ochal sheker. If you say future, I will or I won't eat, the two cases I just discussed, and then you go against it, that's called a Shevuot sheker. Okay? It's called a false oath. Where's the pasuk warning? Because when people say, if you do this, you're transgressing the following verse. They have to say the verse. Lo tishav, therefore it's very important to know which one it falls into. Is it shav, like a wasted, right? It's the word meaningless oath, or is it a sheker, a false oath? So the future is false oath. Don't take an oath in my name falsely. If you talk about something that was already, that's shav. That's a useless oath. Okay, it has no purpose whatsoever. Vain, an oath in vain. Don't use God's name in vain. Konamot, if you use the word konam kikar ze'alai, which is a language of a vow, over below yachel dvaro. If that's a regular vow, and a vow is don't desecrate your word. You said you were going to do something, you have to do it. So those are the three lotas, says according to Rav Dimi. Meitive. But now we have a difficulty because there's a braita that says shav v'sheker echad. Shav and sheker are one and the same. Now, how do we understand this? My love, is it not to say midashav l'shavar af sheker nami l'shavar? If shav is on past, right? I ate or I didn't eat yesterday, then sheker should also be on the past because it says it's all one and the same. Alma achalti v'lo achalti sheker. Then achalti and lo achalti should be sheker, not shav. So I'm sorry, achalti v'lo achalti should be sheker and not ochal v'lo ochal. Okay. So they say, no, midiria hakadita v'hakadita. No, when it said sheker v'shavachadin, it meant they're the same, just one is the past and one is the future. Okay, one is, saying I will do something, one is saying I didn't do something. So then, okay, well then they're not one and the same. So my davar achad, what does it mean they're davar achad? Now we're going to get off on a nice little tangent about something maybe a little more practical than all these oaths. Dibi dibor achad ne'emru. They were said in one mouthful of God when we got the Ten Commandments. Meaning, right, if you remember in the Ten Commandments, okay, the more famous one is Zachor and Shamor, which we're going to get to right now. Okay, Kiditanya, Zachor v'Shamor b'dibor achad ne'emru. Masha'ein yachol hapeh ledaber, masha'ein ha'ozen yachol lishma, right? Normally, this is some miraculous thing. Normally, a mouth can't speak two words at the same time, and an ear can't hear two words at the same time. But this was a miraculous thing that Shamor and Zachor were both said at the same time, and that's because in Shemot and in Tvarim, it has different words. Shamor Yom Shabbat, Zachor Yom Shabbat. Likewise with lo tisa, lo taneh berecha et shaker, and lo taneh berecha et shav. In Shemot it says sheker. In Dvarim it says, did I say Vayikra before? Sorry, I meant Dvarim. In Dvarim it says shav. So basically, those two words, just like Zachor v'Shamor, this is much less known, those two words were said at the same time. Now the Gemara is going to explain, I get Shamor and Zachor, because we learned something from that, but why Sheker and Shav? So what do we learn from Zachor v'Shamor? A very famous halacha. Kid Rav Ad bar Ahava, the Amar Rav Ad bar Ahava, Nashim chayavot b'kiddush hayom dvar Torah. Nashim have a Torah obligation for Kiddush. This is why theoretically women can be motzi other men in Kiddush because they have the exact same obligation. There's a bit of an issue, maybe because of Zila Milton. That depends on the situation, whether it's appropriate or not for a woman to say Kiddush. But yes, a woman can say Kiddush for a man because they have the same obligation. Usually the problem comes in when they have different obligations. It's one of the big questions by Megillah. Do women have the same obligation as men do to read the Megillah, or is it just to hear the Megillah? If they have an obligation to hear, they can be mostly women. They can't necessarily be mostly men. It's a whole question about that. But with Kiddush, it's very clear. They have the exact same obligation. Now, how do we get this? Well, to Amar Kras Zachor. Now, Zachor is the obligation to remember Kiddush. How do we to remember Shabbat? How do we remember Shabbat? Bidvarim, with words. How do we remember with words? Saying Kiddush. Shamor is observe. Don't do malacha. That's all the negative prohibitions. Now, women are always obligated in all the negative prohibitions. They're just not obligated in time-bound mitzvot unless there's some special drasha like here, where it says women are obligated in Kiddush. So, Zachor v'Shamor, kosher yeshna b'shmira, yeshna b'schira. So, whoever's included in shmira is included in schira. V'hane nashe will be inu b'shmira, inu nami b'schira. Women, because they're obligated in shmira, they're also obligated in schira, and that's how we get the women are obligated in Kiddush on a Torah level. Hela. But what's the point of Shevuot, Sheker and Shav being said at the same time? Now again, we talked before that generally things you express in words you don't get lashes for. So what they're going to say right now is just like they get lashes for Shav, they also get lashes for Sheker. Now, the Gemara says, it should be the opposite. Just like they get lashes for Sheker, they get lashes for Shav. Why? Sheker as lahaba. Sheker is the only case where you could actually have an action done. I swear I won't eat, and then I eat. There's an action there. I ate. Okay, if I say I swear I ate or I swear I didn't eat, the action is happening. The action happened already. The prohibition is when I expressed it in words. So the real thing should be, it should be learned from Sheker to Shav, not from Shav to Sheker. So they say, Ela ema. Okay, fine. Say, Keshem shelo ala sheker, kach lo ken nami ala shav. Okay, fine. So say like this. Just like there's a case of sheker where you actually did an action, you'll be obligated for that action of eating and you'll get lashes. Also, shav, you're going to get lashes for it. You might remember we learned that there's a whole exception to the rule of lav shein bo maseh, which is the Shevuot shav. And that we're learning through here. But now they say pshita, high lav, high lav. But actually, that's kind of obvious. And they don't really say why it's obvious, but we learned this already. What's the pasuk by Shav? Ki lo yinakeh Hashem et asher yisad shmo l'shav. In the Ten Commandments, God won't cleanse someone who did this. And what's the drasha? God won't cleanse them, but the court will. Meaning, you get lashes for Shevuot Shav. But we learned that this is one of the exceptions to the rule. We learned it based on that drasha. So now they say, right, both of them independently have reasons why they should basically be get lashes. So you don't need to learn one from the other. To which they said, no, you do, because Ma'u detema kedamale Rav Papa Abaye lo yinakeh klal hamash malan kedushanele. You might have thought that Rav Papa said to Abaye, maybe lo yinakeh Hashem means not only God but nobody can cleanse you of this. Remember, punishment is cleansing. It creates this, atonement for you. Maybe there is no atonement for the sin at all, not even by the hands of the court. Therefore, they want to teach you, no, it is. Okay, that's the drasha, and we'll get to another explanation tomorrow. Okay, so let's go through our kind of long, complicated daf, but we started with this contradiction. Is ochalach for sure ochal? What about in that braita appears not? We had two explanations, right? Either the context, or maybe it's not really ochal and it's really iochal. And then what did that teach us? Then we got to this braita that was very hard to understand because it said isar shvu, and then it said, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, or depending on something, and wasn't so clear. So Abaye understood isar really isn't a shvu, it's hatpasa b'shvu, and it really depends what you hold about that debate. You know, Abaye himself holds it's fine, but not everyone does, and therefore that's the second line of the braita. And Rava says, no, there is no such thing as hatpasa b'shvu, and therefore isar is not a language that means that works like a hatpasat shvuah, because then it wouldn't work as any, that you would never have an obligation. And the braita says you are obligated sometimes. And according to Rava, it's depending on how you worded your isar. If it's worded like a shvuah, it'll be a shvuah. If it's worded like a neder, it'll be a neder. And again, if it's shvuah, you bring a korban. If it's neder, you don't bring a korban. Then we got into, kind of where they get what they said in the psukim. Then we had a contradiction for Rava, which we resolved. And then that was the whole Gedalia ben Achikam braita, and then we went to Rav Dimi, who brought in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. What, right? L'sha'avar is shav, la'atid is sheker, and konamot is lo yachel dvaro, right? And we had the psukim for each one. What would you need to be warned about? And then we said, what wait, but it says Shabbos Sheker Echad. And then we say, oh no, that means something different, that they were said at the same moment. And what does that teach us? That just like you get lashes for Sheker, you also got lashes for Shav. And even though we could learn it from a different pasuk, well, just in case you thought maybe we could learn something else from that pasuk, no, you really do get it from the pasuk. But that's why we need to tell you Shav and Sheker. That was our quick review of our daf. Wishing everyone a good day, and should hear good news in days to come. Let's hope.